Thanks to everyone for attending this week's community call. We've got 4 UMIPs up for discussion this week. 353 to add Fei as a collateral type. PR 358 as an omnibus collateral add. PR 357 for a generic KPI price identifier. And PR 364 for a price identifier omnibus. If we take them in reverse order, or I don't know if you want us to take Fei first, because it does actually look like there was no significant issues raised with it.
Yeah,
so
we
it
can.
would be quite quick if you want to jump off. But of course, you're welcome to stay.
I mean, honestly, I'm happy in staying, and I'm interested in the rest of the discussion as well.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, we'll put it at the end, just in case Brianna wants to join us. If we take them in reverse order then, and start with the price identifier omnibus, I'll just bring this up on screen. We have a price identifier omnibus here, which adds pool badger, Gnosis, Olympus DAO, and Idle, and they're all paired with USD. There was a couple of issues with the initial assessment. Remove graph as an example data provider for on-chain data, and remove Huobi as a market for Badger. Renus, would you like to speak to this one?
I think you just dropped for a second. Renus, we're just talking about the collateral or the price identifier omnibus.
Yes, so I saw only a couple of remaining smaller issues, like Huobi for Badger, moving as an example. Do you have anything else for this?
Why do they?
We want to remove the graph?
Yes, because we are currently also not providing any additional example queries, which just are afraid could potentially confuse readers of this UMIP, because at the end of the day, and the UMIP, the graph allows just seeing spot price, but if somebody needs to follow through for voting, they would still need to do actual TVAP calculation, and that's only doing with crypto or any other means, but not particular. The graph query on itself might not be helpful.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
I also think generally, since you define the price feed implementations as something that's not using the graph, and then providing the graph as the data sources isn't, I don't know, it doesn't really matter because it's technically the same data, but it's not necessarily that useful. Especially since the price feed implementation gives you a script that you could use to get this data anyways. I think there's a question, generally a question around for on-chain data, if we really need to provide any sort of example data source.
I suppose if you've got price feed, that kind of covers it.
Yeah, I mean, the graph is just like a proxy for getting this data, but it's really accessible like in a lot of different ways, which is kind of different from like something like centralized exchange trading data, which might not actually be accessible. And is kind of the purpose of having some sort of like example data source where it's just like proving that it's actually accessible.
Would we then consider this price identifier UMIP good to go on the basis of removing the graph as a data provider and also the removing of Hobie, don't know how to pronounce that, as a fourth market for Badger? We usually only take 3 markets. Or is there a particular reason to keep Hobie in?
I just commented that it seemed unnecessary since it was like relatively low volume and we had 3 other higher volume markets anyways.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So we're good to go with those 2 conditions.
Yes.
At least from my perspective, this was like a model of what a price identifier omnibus should look like. I think Rainis did a great job.
Excellent. Cool. Moving on to PR 359. We have the General KPI options price identifier here. There's been some changes since I looked at it. Chandler, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, sure. Let me just get it up on my side. There was a few clarifying points, and quite a lot has been updated since we first got into it, specifically around the implementation section. I saw a few comments come in like at the very last minute from Chris, which just seems more around the implementation section. But other than that, it didn't seem like too many of the questions were like, I haven't actually looked at Chris's comments at the moment. So maybe Chris, do you want to just like articulate them? But other than that, the other questions seemed a bit more like just clarifying.
The only one that warrants discussion now is near the end of the doc, you speak about like the failure mode of the price feed. Like I think where this becomes complicated is like when we can't actually calculate the correct outcome, right? Like the API doesn't load and like the backup feed doesn't work and there's no broad market consensus, right? You speak about like wanting to expire the KPI options as worthless, but I think maybe we should just like clarify exactly what worthless means, right? Like, so based off your implementation here, I think it just means that the DVM would return the price of 0, right? But maybe that's not always the right thing that we would want to return. Like maybe it would make sense to actually put a property in the ancillary data, which kind of defines like in the failure mode of the API of the price request, like in the case the DVM can't resolve, then the DVM should return this other number, right? So like the requester can actually choose what that failure mode might be. Maybe this is overthinking it, but my reasoning really was like, not in all scenarios does 0 mean worthless, right? Like 0 could mean different things depending on how you're using this. But if it's always for KPI options, then maybe 0 means worthless. But yeah, I just wanted to raise that point.
Yeah, Rainis and I actually discussed this earlier today, where we were expiring at 0 might be the top end of the payout, right? Like let's say if you want to do a KPI option of something where if an event didn't happen, like in a security event, then you have a payout. Exactly. So I totally agree with you on that. And so worthless in this state, which we can be a bit more explicit on, is either 0, as in terms of the payout is 0, or the floor of whatever the KPI was set to.
Yeah, but so the thing is like the UMIP is referring to what the price should be, right? So the price shouldn't care about the implementation detail of that particular financial contract, right? Like I agree the payout should be 0, but also like as soon as you go to that, it's like the payout for what? Like the long token or the short token and the LSP, and like what does that mean in terms of the price? So because this is really around like how the DVM should respond to a specific question. So like agreed that the payout should be 0, but like how do you generalize that unless the requester specifies like the condition in which a price equals a 0 payout for like the party that they care about? So maybe like to encompass like all scenarios, you just let the requester specify, like you add a required field for what the 0 state should be, or the worthless state.
Yeah, do you think it needs to be added as like separate field for ancillary data, or it's just sufficient that it's fully described in a linked methodology like document?
I mean, what happens if the link doesn't work, right? Like I think that this is like this should encompass like all failure modes, right? Like this is the number that if it breaks, it gets returned, right? Like I don't know, it just worries me as soon as like the ancillary data contains a URL and then the URL doesn't load, and then like what do you do then?
Yeah,
right?
this makes sense.
I don't think it's like a big lift to add like one field to the ancillary data. Maybe you call it like failure price or something, or like yeah, something to that effect, right?
Or
like, in the case of failure,
unresolvable price, because
perfect. Yeah, that's better.
like some of they might have like different context, and then they just decide what you do with it later on.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Unresolvable price.
Maybe just to be nitpicky on unresolvable price, I agree that we should have an unresolvable outcome, maybe not price, because not all the metrics are price-based.
Okay, unresolvable.
But the DVM
metric.
returns as price though, right? Like it's
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Unresolvable. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think of like all of the things that the DVM returns as prices. Like we kind of tend to view them that way. But you are right, Chandler. Like it's not strictly a price per se.
Aren't you describing a situation where ancillary data is just like completely misset though? Like if everything doesn't work, then why is there any assumption that they would like correctly set an unresolvable price?
Yeah, in that case, sure. I think everybody would just default to returning 0.
Yeah, and
or don't vote anything, right? Like abstain, like mass abstention, something like that. But just even worse as well. But yeah, because then you like the contract can get locked, and that's in those scenarios. But that is a good point though, Sean. Like, what is the default stance if so a price request comes in on this identifier, and like that, let's say the ancillary data is corrupted, right? Like it's not encoded correctly, right? So like it's impossible to answer a request, and you don't know what the worthless state is. Should the UMIP specify what to do in that case? Like the two options are like ignore the vote, right? Like no one votes, which is kind of hard to enforce at a protocol layer, because like if everyone votes on something and agrees, they'll still get rewards and it'll settle. Or vote for 0, which might be okay, but it doesn't like encompass all scenarios. But as long as the UMIP specifies it, I think that's fine. And maybe the latter makes more sense, just to like if it's literally there's no information about it, then just vote for 0.
I think that's okay. And like if you were a contract employer using this price identifier, then that would just be like part of the spec of using this price identifier, right? So you would just need to like understand that.
Yeah, this is of course a bit tricky, because in the ideal world, I think the contract like deployers also might want to set some price resolvement like expiration term, and when it's not like resolved within this time, then the contract can go around that, and then we need to be like that much concerned. But as I understand correctly, currently it's not like possible.
I also had some questions around like if there's an expectation that there's like a couple links in this, one for like an API price provider and one for like a methodology document. How much should we care about like hardening this where it like can't really be changed? And like how should we provide guidelines or like kind of requirements around like how this should be hosted? Like should you be pointing towards a specific like git commit hash or like a specific IPFS hash or what?
You mean endpoint or this methodology?
I think the endpoint like is fine, but because like right now we use endpoints that could change, but we always have this like universal UMIP to refer back to make sure that the methodology agrees with like the methodology in the UMIP. So I think I'd be more worried about like the method changing.
So currently in this UMIP, we have described it that the deployer has to ensure that this method is a platform where somebody track all the changes, and any like change can be like seen by the voters. Do you think it's not sufficient, or do you need any additional team mechanisms? Apart from naming particular like providers.
I guess I'm just wondering what we would do in the situation where it's like not hosted on a platform like that. Will we just return the price anyways?
Yeah, we would have to, or we return the cannot resolve price, right? Like, I think that this kind of UMIP is going to inherently be quite brittle, right? Like they can break, and like if it's misparameterized, like it's going to fail. So yeah, I don't think necessarily just saying like just because you host it with this particular service provider or like you provide an IPFS hash, like that doesn't necessarily like create any stronger guarantees that it's going to work, right? Like maybe I put it on IPFS and then I don't pin it, right? And then it's not downloadable. Like my point is like it's as soon as you like leaving the stuff open to potentially being modified, like you could point to the URL somewhere and then change the files. Like there's no way to like to provide strong guarantees around that, which I think is okay, right? Like that's kind of by virtue of the way this UMIP is designed, it's going to be brittle, and that's okay as long as there's like a very clear path for how voters behave in the scenario where you can't resolve the price the way it was intended.
That makes sense, especially for KPI options where it's like really the only party at risk is like the deployer, the person like giving out these KPI options.
Yeah.
You also could have a scenario, even if it was in something that tracked changes like GitHub, where one methodology went up at the start, but by the time the contract expired, it had been edited. And which version do you actually take there? Because in some cases, it could be edited simply to correct an error. In other cases, it could be edited for, poor purposes.
Yeah, currently I think we have left it quite open in that edits are allowed, for example, but not when they are changing the objective of the program in a like significant manner. I'm not sure if we can like be more specific because we don't want, I think, to limit changing method altogether.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like it would be impossible to restrict it. Like you could enforce that they like include like a commit, like a hash of the markdown file or something like that, and then you could like always check it hasn't been edited. But I don't know. I think it becomes way too prescriptive at that point. Like just accept that like it can be edited and like it can be changed after the fact. I don't think there's a way around that.
It's like
because also currently with a specific UMIP and price identifier, it's also like hosted on GitHub, And also we have like seen the cases where voters discover some discrepancies post factum. Also, we have to change and amend the UMIPs. So that's I think normal practice. We have to accommodate that for these generalized options.
Yeah, I think of it in two ways. The one is that each of these a contract that gets launched with this identifier is kind of like it's the responsibility of the deployer to actually understand what the identifier is about, and in the UMIP it explicitly says it's the team's responsibility to take care of making sure that they report enough information for the UMIP team to resolve a price request if it ever gets disputed. And I think that in some way absolves us of having to dig too deep. And if we can't get to a reasonable understanding, then I agree that just a fallback to a worthless state might be better, and the definition of worthless state be a little bit more clear, because I think getting the sense of the call that worthless state isn't quite well defined at the moment. The other part, which I think is more of a guarantee, is very specifically that teams want to launch these options, want to do it to incentivize their programs, and so it's in their interest to make sure that they work. Therefore, it's in their interest to make sure that they report prices correctly. So instead of it maybe being technically stable, it's technically quite brittle, as Chris said, but more like assured that a team that wants to launch KPI options has their reputation at stake. And that's kind of what why I think teams would want to report this correctly.
I'm wondering if it would be sufficient to just add a little bit more to the security consideration section and kind of articulate some of those stances. Like if you suspect something fishy, you default to the worthless state, but it's kind of understood that the responsibility of XYZ falls onto the deployer of this contract.
I did add a little bit of a section around that very specific point, that there might be manipulation or an entity controlling the information. I think that, to me, sounds a bit correct. I don't know if that encompasses more. I'm more than happy to add more to that section.
No, you're right. You're right. My bad. I should have reread it before I spoke out loud.
Yeah.
How do people feel about this going forward? I think there's possibly some need to clarify the worthless state or unresolvable state. There's also some questions around kind of versioning and permanency. To get involved in time for this week's vote? Or do you think we should take a little bit more time to consider and push it to next week so that we're not in a rush to get a definitive answer to those questions? What's the general sentiment?
For the worthless state statement, I think defining that would be relatively easy. It's just a bit of a like if this then that, and because it's quite general, it's like a default to worthless state unless the instructions are clear. And I think that's quite easy to get done within this round. Reynes, maybe you can speak to the other two questions.
Yes, those other questions being this for data format. I think that's I think also like doable, and we can check it within a couple of like a day or two, so shouldn't be a problem. But what was the last one apart from this formatting?
I think Vari said like the versioning or like permanence, which I think we, resolved on this call. and I don't really think there's any actionable items there.
Yeah, I also didn't think so. Yeah.
So we're good to go on this with a condition of the unresolvable state being clarified and ancillary data being added. I'm not hearing any particular objections, so I assume that's a yes. Cool.
Thumbs up.
Okay. The next one was the Collateral Omnibus. Chandler, do you want to speak to this again?
Sure, more than happy to. Main comment that I saw was just around Sean checking my fees. So when I'd set them, they were at 400. Prices have moved, and so I just updated those. And then the other one was just around switching the DAO or the protocol name versus the token name, which is just, it's very easy to do.
I think the other thing, if we want to just combine like the Fey discussion in this, is like we have these collateral omnibuses that go through sometimes, Grant, and just to kind of condense the votes for low risk things such as Fey, we try to include like all of the collaterals within like one UMIP. I'm wondering if you guys are okay with that from like the Fey perspective.
Yeah, I think that would be fine with us. I see no issue with that.
Yeah, and sorry about that, Grant, because I think we did this like asynchronously, and these omnibuses don't come in every now and again. And I did see the messages on Discord around you wanting to add Fey. So I've already gone ahead and added Fey to this UMIP already, so the Collateral Omnibus. So if this passes, then Fey gets added.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool.
So doesn't it make material difference to you and your use case?
No, yeah, it seems to be exactly the same. So yeah.
Cool.
I do think there is like some great content in the Fey UMIP that, like, since we have already, there's no reason to not add it to this omnibus. What do you think, Chandler?
Yeah,
Should
I saw that comment.
Then will we take a look at Fey, seeing as we're considering adding it to the omnibus?
I think it's already in the omnibus.
It's already in the omnibus.
Yeah.
Yeah, at the bottom.
Is okay. Cool.
One just like a process thing. It's a little bit easier if the token address isn't linked, but is actually like in the UMIP. Just for when we're proposing this, then you can like go and copy and paste directly from the UMIP with fewer clicks. So that's a really minor thing, but helpful.
Sure, John, I'll happily do that.
Okay, thanks. Could still be a link, but yeah.
No, I'll do both. Don't worry. I got what you're wanting.
Just to draw people's attention as well, this is the first time that we've added a non-mainnet token to the whitelist with QDAO and Q, which is running on the Polygon chain.
Yep, and Nick wrote a script for this, which we're reviewing, but looks really cool. And I think that he volunteered to work on this. I'll double check to see. I don't think that you need to split these out. I think that it can propose for mainnet or for Polygon, or like in the same proposal. Chris is nodding. I think that's true. So then, yeah, I guess Nick will be running this one just to troubleshoot anything.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah.
Also,
Sorry, Sean.
just from like a meta process perspective, like, should we be looking for Polygon addresses for these other collateral types and adding those as well? Like Fey, I don't know if you guys are on Polygon, but like for any collateral that's upcoming, like if there is a Polygon address, I don't see any reason to not add that as well, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Chandler, did you check by chance for these?
No, no, I didn't, but I can quickly get that together.
Sweet.
That does become a bigger issue as we move to other L2s as well. Whether we add everything that we have a bridge to in the UMIPs, or whether we only add the primary one and then add on other L2s or other chains as and when.
What's the bigger issue there? Just like how we handle that?
Yeah, just that, like, you know, if we're like 15 L2s, then finding all those different token addresses across different side chains and L2s becomes a bit of a pain to keep them all up to date.
I think from a usability standpoint, there would be a subset of really highly used tokens as collateral. I'm thinking USDT, DAI, maybe one or two very big project tokens that will be on multiple chains. So that might be on 3, 4, maybe 5 chains, but I suspect each like smaller team DAO tokens that might go to maybe 2 or 3 chains at most. And I don't see it being too much of a problem. And also that is a bit of a future problem when we get to more than one L2. And I think that would actually be a couple months away from now.
Okay, cool. Are we now going to add that into the guidelines for collateral types that we would like UMIP proposers to add all chains?
I think it's a completely optional thing. Like if somebody wants to, they can. And usually the person that's proposing the collateral is also the one that's going to use it first, right? Here we're proposing these collaterals for other teams, so we might as well make it like max use, like make it as usable as possible, like early on, right?
Mm-hmm. I'll update the guidelines to reflect that.
Can we also update the doc site so that there's some kind of indicator on whether or not it's available on another chain? Like
Yeah.
approved. Cool.
Yeah, I was just thinking of just like a second bar along the side that just has the icon of which chain it's on.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Sorry, Bart, go ahead.
No, on you go, Sean. You go.
I don't know if we have any like other pressing urgent matters, but I was just curious, since we have the Fey folks on the call, like what's the intended use case for Fey here?
I think we are sort of excited to move down the road, explore KPI options with Fey. I was reading through the docs and I realized there's an additional process for that. But we kind of just want to give our users sort of freedom to explore. And the LSP is also very interesting as well, especially with Fey's like reweighting nature, and how there's like this like time parameter for Fey that like really has a large effect on the price, at least the peg value of it. So I think there's just a lot of exploring that can be done. Down the road, I think we'd also like to add Tribe as a collateral asset, which is our governance token. And that would definitely, I think, have more potential applications than Fey itself.
Is there anything unusual about Tribe that would prevent us from just rolling it into a collateral omnibus now?
Not that I can think of. It's a fairly standard token. There's no odd parameters around it. It's just a standard ERC20.
Okay, so it might be worthwhile to just calculate the final fee since we're doing a collateral omnibus anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be cool. I'd like to see Tribe get in there. So
yeah, Grant, if you can throw the details at me either tonight or early tomorrow.
Okay.
Wait, just before I commit to a time, when does this need to be committed by? Are we voting on a Thursday or a Friday this week?
Thursday.
All right. So like absolute latest by Wednesday. So yeah, so Grant, if you can get me the details like by the latest by Wednesday, and we can add it to this omnibus.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
And then just on that same point, I think Grant, you mentioned like it was a bit of a surprise to you that you had to go through this process again. That maybe we should add Fey USD as a price identifier on the price identifier omnibus.
Well, isn't it? Well, potentially, right? But if it was more for like KPI options, then maybe like they could be the first users of this generalized KPI options price identifier, and you wouldn't actually have to go through this process again. But also, like Fey is a stable coin, so I guess there's like a question around like, would you actually need a Fey USD price ID potentially?
Good point. Didn't think of that.
And another one we're thinking about, in addition to the generalized KPI options one, is to look at the yes or no query, because that opens up a lot of interesting things that you can just kind of do without an additional approval. So I can, let me find that UMIP just to share it, because I think it's a pretty cool one, and it's pretty flexible.
I think we should add the Tribe USD and USD Tribe price IDs, Rainis, if you're up for that, along with the collateral.
Yeah, I'm just I'm not aware of what are like the markets for it, and do we have like sufficient liquidity? But I'll definitely look for that.
Cool.
Yep, and Grant, so I just shared that in the chat if you see that, but it's kind of a similar idea, but like even simpler. It's basically just asking a yes or no question on some publicly verifiable thing, and you can throw the question in ancillary data. So it's super flexible for things that might not even be KPI options either, but just different ways to use the tokens once they're approved as collateral.
Cool. This looks very cool. Yeah, I think we would be interested in utilization of this. I'm just reading through now.
Cool.
Excellent. So we'll add Tribe to the collateral one and Tribe USD to the price identifier.
Shall I just draft that up and comment it on the price identifier omnibus?
Yeah, if you can do for the USD price for Tribe, just add that to the price identifier omnibus, and then for the Tribe collateral, you can just comment on the collateral omnibus.
Okay, got it.
Cool. Maybe just for the USD price feed, just if there are any exchanges or price sources that aren't, that you'd recommend us use, that's like the most liquid.
We're actually not really on any major exchanges right now with Tribe. I believe that is something we're working on.
You have
so that might impact our sort of feed ability here.
What are the most?
It's almost primary. completely on Uniswap right now.
I mean, there's $157 million in Uniswap, right?
So
Yes,
I think
that
that's
sounds
more
right.
than sufficient liquid supported.
Absolutely.
Go.
Yeah.
Right.
Is there any other issues people would like to discuss?
Nope.
In that case, thanks to you all for turning up, and thanks, Grant, especially for coming and explaining Fey to us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye.
Cool.
Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Bye.